the 6th day of January 2022. Welcome, everybody. And so we're going to talk about what Canada done 90 days after Fukushima started melting down, which was nuclear reactors in Japan. There was multiple reactors and fuel pools that had melted down. It contaminated most of the planet in heavy radioactive fallout, and all of the planet in radioactive fallout. And so ground zero is going to be an incredibly radioactive place. We have a poll tonight. Was Canada wrong in lifting the Fukushima radioactive food ban 90 days after nuclear meltdowns started? And you can tell this is a touchy subject because the crazies have only gave me 3 viewers, which is the lowest number we've ever seen in history. So that's censorship at Google. They don't want the world to understand how incredibly, unbelievably, hideously, odiously evil they actually are. And so think about the radioactive fallout, as the Japan Times column had put it. As the public, possibly worldwide, sickens over time, the truth will come out about Fukushima. And what's horrifying about this story is Canada lifted restrictions on Japanese food imports on June 14th, 2011, which is 93 days after this started. 55 countries had banned food, not just from Fukushima, but from half of Japan. And it just seems surreal that they've done something like that. And Canada is supposed to be the best place on the planet to live, right? It's the worst place to live because they've done that. You can't trust the food. And so what I'm going to walk you through, and I can probably do about, I was trying to work it out earlier, probably 60 shows with the documentation that I have of how bad Canada was pounded by radiation. And so to import food while the meltdowns were still raging, and I mean raging, it just doesn't seem real. It's really, it doesn't seem possible that something like that could happen. Every organism in Fukushima prefecture is contaminated with radiation. 1.4 million becquerels a kilogram. These are absurd numbers. You would multiply that by 64, 68 to get a square meter of, say, farmland, like the size of your small dinner table, a square meter. Multiply that number by 64 to 68. And they're growing food and shipping it worldwide. And they're growing food right by the radiation. Now, they never started picking up bags until 2013, several years later. It's shocking, really. The whole story is just, it's surreal. Radioactivity of 6.15 million becquerels a meter square, 60 miles from the meltdown, which means you can't grow food anywhere in that environment. And Fukushima was burning dirty bombs at 100,000 becquerels a kilogram, incinerate it, which liberates the radiation back into the environment. And you have 1 billion pounds at 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. This is not acceptable, no matter how you try to spin this. Incinerating radioactive material could contaminate the environment, and it should have the words again. Is government trying to contaminate every region in Japan by burning the radioactive debris? That if everything and everyone is contaminated, then in a relative sense nobody is? And they found plutonium in every sample. And plutonium was named after the devil. Tokyo area turned out to be as contaminated as the Fukushima. And you're talking about in Tokyo, rain caused 29,250,000 becquerels a square meter in the soil. And so you can't even grow food in Tokyo. It's not fit for consumption for any. It's a death sentence. It's a disease factory. So a lot of people think cancer is the only thing that's going to be manifested from coming in contact with this material. Air samples in Tokyo 270 times more contaminated with just gamma. They're not acknowledging, and you'll notice that a lot here. Do you want to acknowledge alpha or beta or neutrons? This is absurdness. The industry is it's a death cult, and it's trying to exterminate everything and everybody on the planet. And the world needs to make a stand. You can't escape this. And it's revolting that Canada done that, and I'll show you why. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. Irreversible heart damage. Japan is shipping food of just gamma at over 100 becquerels a kilogram. The repercussions for it is there's 1,800 illnesses will show up before cancer finally does. 11 becquerels a kilogram of just gamma emitters, you start to see heart problems. This was studies from Chernobyl, by the way. 6 in 10 Fukushima children tested have diabetes. So if your coal plant, oil plant, or gas plant breaks down, do you expect to see headlines like any of this? Hard to imagine something more frightening than 5-year-olds marching off to irradiated school playgrounds with these Geiger counters. And they're not even Geiger counters, they're dosimeters. They get sent to universities to study these children as if they're lab rats. So universities have completely disconnected. Report that radioactive cesium is causing holes in the hearts of children, and Canada's shipping it in after 90 days is... It just seems impossible, right? Fukushima gives radiation meters 80,000 children to pregnant women and children. And so you started to see children bleeding from nostrils, skin diseases, cardiovascular diseases. And that, of course, I forgot to turn the... Hang on, I'll turn the Geiger counter on for everybody. Not sure why that turned off. Maybe I didn't charge the battery, who knows? And so all of these illnesses you see are the same illnesses you say they claim you're going to get from coronavirus, by the way, which obviously was created to cover up all the illnesses you're going to get from consuming and breathing and drinking and living in this environment. Yeah, it wasn't shown on my screen for some reason. Children's bleeding from nostril skin diseases. Fukushima's most serious man-made disaster in human history. Obesity rates now nearly double Japan's average. And excessive weight gain after a nuclear crisis is a marker of radiation brain damage. North America, Canada, the United States, in the last 10 years have seen an epidemic of obesity, an epidemic, particularly children on top of that. And so if you see people, your whole life just randomly gain weight, it's because they've been eating Japanese food and have been polluted by the radioactive fallout, as you'll see coming up. Here's some examples of the radioactive fallout. 1,500 atoms of sulfur per cubic meter. This sulfur peroxide, hydrogen, buckyballs they're talking about. Tends to concentrate in the testicles. 360 plus atoms of radioactive sulfur per day inhaled by Californians. Which also, it's not just humans, it's animals and mammals and insects and birds and everything else. This is why we see all the species going extinct. 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. Irreversible lesions. And so the people, the industry that censors me, do they really believe that them and their children and their friends and their families are going to magically escape this? Imagine you got a job at Google to censor me, and by proxy you destroy everybody you love and yourself. Imagine how arrogant and hubris and pompous you got to be to do that job. Imagine how despicable you got to be to have that job on top of that. 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in your vital organs. This is not a game, by the way. And this industry has absolutely no right to be allowed to poison everybody and every creature. We're not supposed to sit in silence. You're supposed to speak out. And I'm trying to set examples of that. CC-137 immediately damages the heart muscles. It's not slow acting, so you can die of heart attacks by eating this stuff quite quickly. And you are, right? You see an incredible increase of heart problems. Extreme increase in mortality caused by cardiac diseases. Death rates might give the creeps to some people. In just one community in a single month was 12,700 excess heart attacks. So here's how bad it's so bad that Tokyo Vice Governor suggested a draft, not of nuclear scientists or nuclear academics or nuclear students or anything like that, or nuclear companies, but people who don't know any better. 60 and older should be prepared to die at the Fukushima plant. And 2 months later, Canada lifts the ban on the food poisons every single human in Canada every day forever after. Because Japan, the only country that was really accepting food was Canada. So Japan started increasing their shipments to Canada immediately. And that's the definition of evil. The nuclear industry it's unconscionable what they got done here. It's absolutely, unequivocally unconscionable to do this. And then they admit that the decontamination is only for reducing external exposures. They continue to grow food and ship it to Canada. Other countries wouldn't take it. And so think about how bad the radioactive fallout was on the other side of the Pacific and the Atlantic. 1 million becquerels a square meter over the West Coast. You had 20 million particles of radioactive iodine per liter and 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129. And what that means is the iodine, and these are absurd numbers. This is absurd numbers. The iodine ends up in the insects and birds and mammals and animals and humans, thyroid glands in particular, and is turned into radioactive hormones. Absurd illnesses you're talking about. And so the coronavirus, the idea that was to cover up what this is doing. And they knew there was a delayed reaction. And these are absurd numbers. 450,000 times Xenon-133. It'll burn a hole through your lungs or birds' lungs or insects or animals. And it'll end up in their bones, in their pelvises, and mutate their stem cells. And persisted for weeks. Levels consistently rise and fall in a 40-day cycle circling the globe. So why would you ship food in from a nuclear wasteland? And starting in 2013, they started picking up 1-ton bags, over 60 million of them. Canada was shipping food in for 2 years straight at that point, before they even picked up a bag. Canada lifts restrictions on a Japanese food from a nuclear wasteland. And as you can imagine, this is radiation in farm country. The bags of radiation they're picking up. Canada's lift all restrictions from a nuclear wasteland. On food imports from a nuclear wasteland, become the first country to lift all restrictions by 40 other countries. It was actually 55. And areas continued to restrict food imports from Japan. And that was basically silenced. There was very little media reported it. Canadian Food Inspection Agency said, "The hell with Canadians." Would you eat food from a nuclear wasteland on purpose? Of course not. Japan's export of farm and fish products to Canada in the year before was 4.6 billion yen, which is 51 million Canadian. But Japan couldn't ship the food anywhere else, so Canada got bombarded. All these bags you're looking at are 1-ton bags of radiation, for goodness sakes. Health Canada detected massive amounts of radioactive materials from Fukushima. It spiked above the maximum allowable limits at 4 or 5 sites. Now, the Harper government at that time had muzzled the scientist for several years straight. His government was in power at that time. But this was the nuclear industry in Canada that done this to us. At the same time, they got $12 billion for Darlington nuclear power plant refurbishment and $12 billion memorandum of understandings for the Bruce Power site. So they poisoned everybody and then looted the Canadian Treasury immediately following the nuclear meltdown. So the scientists in Canada had to get permission from the government to have a interview, and they also had to get permission to publish a paper, and they also had to get paper telling them what they were allowed to say in order to cover up Fukushima. And that was all done to us by the Canadian nuclear industry. What constitutes a crime? And then what constitutes genocide? What I'm showing you is rock solid documentation of a genocide carried out by Canadian nuclear industries against their own country. Against everybody. In 2011, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans scientist was blocked from speaking to the media about her research suggesting a viral infection may be linked to higher salmon mortality. Well, the radiation compromises the immune system and they're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses. Canadian scientists protest against government censorship. In fact, what they were doing was they were walking down the streets of Montreal and Vancouver with pots and pans, and they were wearing muzzles, and they were pounding on the pots and pans because they didn't understand why they were being censored. They never had no understanding. But what was going on was Fukushima was food was being imported into the country, and they were afraid somebody was going to blow the story wide open, right? Columbia medical professor inhaling just one hot particle can cause a cancer, or eating one hot particle can cause a cancer, or drinking one hot particle can cause a cancer. This is some of the models of the radioactive fallout. Canada, you can see, doesn't even exist. It's completely buried under the plume. So how bad is it going to be at ground zero? It's going to be insidiously bad, right? So on top of that, why would you eat food from the ground zero that caused the whole planet? And this model is only based upon 20 days. If they let the model run for another 10 days, all of this is covered too. And this is an invisible snowstorm type plume of radiation fallout of absurd numbers like I showed you earlier, 220 million atoms per liter of water, for instance, of just iodine 129. Covering the entire planet, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, is also global warming. Inhaling just one hot particle can cause a cancer. Children's health problems increasing, incurable stomach aches, chest pains, nosebleeds that don't stop, diarrhea. And then if you're going to be eating this food, and we are, you're going to see the same thing in Canadians. Again, each one of these pictures are individual pictures. There was over 150,000 sites like this, and they continued to grow food and ship it to the most vulnerable people here in Canada. Fukushima children not growing in weight. Some only gained 1 pound in a year. Japanese safety standards, and Canada, by the way, on radiation levels for children are unconscionable. The nuclear industry obviously hates children with a passion because they know they are the most vulnerable. So why would they allow the radiation to come into the country like that? It's heartbreaking. After just 90 days, they're shipping food in from a nuclear wasteland. Tokyo, which is 220 kilometers away, 10 billion times normal level. Very high concentrations recorded at all monitoring posts in the Northern Hemisphere. So 10 billion times normal, and normal was 10 to 20 to 30 counts per minute. Multiply that by 10 billion. 220 kilometers away. So then all the farms in between that were not consumable at all. It was impossible, right, to have that not contaminated. December the 30th of last year, just a week ago, the Taipei Times came out with an article talking about the radioactive food and how they wanted Taiwan to import the food from the nuclear wasteland. And he said, well, Canada allowed the imports in 2011. But just because Canada done that, does that mean it was safe? Does that mean it was legal? That the nuclear industry had control of the universities and the media and key positions in the government and decided, hey, let's poison every human being in Canada with deadly food from ground zero and no dissent allowed in my country. And so where does responsibility, like if someone don't call them out, then what happens? Then there is never going to be ever, under any circumstances, a debate. Can you imagine how stupid they are? Because they've done it to their own children and their own family members and their own loved ones and their own friends. Can you imagine how self-centered and arrogant you got to be to poison everybody you love because you get a paycheck every week from an industry? Does that not constitute a crime? New Zealand lifted their ban in 2012 because the nuclear industry has influence down there. Imagine how incredibly evil you got to be to even suggest that, and hateful and maniacal and sadistic to even suggest shipping in food from a nuclear wasteland. Australia lifted its ban in 2014, and we know how evil the nuclear industry in Australia is. They are just despicable. They're incredibly, we've covered them thousands of times. They're incredibly despicable people. I've never found a single person in the entire nuclear industry that was likable, that was identifiable as a normal person. They've always come across as extremely gobblish, as in monstrous. And the Philippines in 2019. So Taiwan is saying, look, they all lifted the ban from a nuclear wasteland. We might as well too. But like, why? How can an industry conceive that that is acceptable? Because if not, then nuclear is bad by proxy. So it's better to poison everybody. So you've all heard the stories of the serial killer who was about to be found out, and he killed all of his children and his wife so they wouldn't suffer the embarrassment of what he was doing. That's exactly what we see in the nuclear industry on a gigantic Stockholm Syndrome type scale, where everybody in the nuclear industry is pre-programmed to murder everything on the planet when the gig is up. This year, Singapore lifted all measures, and the EU eased its own. And the EU didn't report, the media didn't report that, by the way. The United States lifted the ban in September, and we covered all of this. And the United States media didn't report that. Japan did. Japan was out bragging that the Americans were stupid and had lifted the ban 10 years later. Citing robust control measures. There was no control measures. I'm showing you absurd amount of documentation. That's simply on... they cannot prove that they had robust control measures because everything was out of control. Canada allowing the imports in 2011 of lethal food, guaranteed to make you sick, and your children quickly. Children are 100 times more susceptible. In Asia, China, South Korea, and Taiwan still have a ban in place because they're not useful idiots like Canada. The bans have impeded the country's recovery from a traumatic event. So it's better to poison everybody in every country so Japan can pretend that everything is okay, is what they're saying. You still can't go back to these communities, but they're still growing food there and shipping it world to countries that are controlled by the nuclear industry. Former Japanese Prime Minister Suga, in power when the United States lifted the ban, said he was deeply moved by Washington's policy change. No, he was totally surprised because the nuclear industries captured the regulators, captured the media, captured the universities in key positions in countries, in pro-nuclear countries, in increments over the last 7 decades. So when you see all of these bags and all these different pictures, what that means is the whole country is incredibly radioactive. These are 1-ton bags. This is absurd amount of radiation. In fact, there's enough 1-ton bags that if you took a 1-ton bag and put it in a 1-ton pickup truck, you put the 1-ton pickup truck bumper to bumper, each pickup truck got a 1-ton bag of radiation in it. That's 10 rows of traffic, bumper to bumper, right around the entire planet. So how can you grow food in that environment and justify murdering and poisoning everybody everywhere? How does that actually work? Where's the psychological? They're sitting there having coffees. Well, I think Canada should lift the ban because nobody's paying attention. Excuse me if I slurp here. Taiwanese are generally concerned about the food safety issue. And they say that it's overinflated. But obviously it's not. I'm not a bad guy for being honest, by the way, even though I'm portrayed as that. You'll never find me lying or misleading or misrepresenting or being deceptive or deceitful or dishonest. Ever. And I've done several thousand of these presentations over the last decade, by the way. And they took down my site 4 months ago with no strikes on the channel. I never got no warning and no explanation. It just tore my site down. While I was out on expeditions, research expeditions, looking for spiders, 400 kilometers away from home in the woods. Not least because of what it would mean for Taiwan's application to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is Japan. So Taipei Times advocates lifting the ban on radioactive wasteland food so they can join a trade organization. So they're saying, let's poison everybody in Taiwan so we can join the trade organization. Doesn't that worry anybody on the planet? Is there anybody human left on this planet? Is there anybody left on the planet with a conscience? There's a handful of us, but I don't see anybody else on the planet with a conscience. Certainly nobody in the nuclear industry has a conscience. I've never seen anybody in the nuclear industry with a conscience. We've never seen an academic of any discipline speak out about this topic, by the way. And so each one of these pictures unequivocally shows you that you can't grow food in this area, and you should never ship it to unsuspecting people worldwide. That's not acceptable. That's an incredible crime against humanity. It's a genocide. There's simply no logical explanation for doing this. And this is why I describe this industry as a death cult and a secret society, because they're 100% unequivocally genocidal by these acts. The arguments for lifting the ban more than a decade after it was implemented are clear. Concerns were initiated raising over contamination of food products from the 5 prefectures Chiba, Fukushima, Gunma, Ibaraki, and Tochigi in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, but there are some questions over the scientific basis for those concerns due to the relatively low levels of actual contamination. First off, Chiba is right by Tokyo. Second off, these bags are not low-level radiation. It's 100,000 atoms per kilogram minimum, and there's 60 million of the bags. You don't pick up 60 million 1-ton bags because it's low level. And that was only 3% of the land that they'd done that to, where they were trying And they did, to some extent, successfully trick people into coming back into it. But as you can see, most of it is farmland. They never stopped farming. It just doesn't seem real, see? And to claim that it's relatively low levels of actual contamination is this incredible, unbelievable contempt for all life. I'm begging this planet to come to its senses. And I work myself into the ground every day in the hopes that the world can have an opportunity to survive what they're doing to us. If we don't make a stand, there is no hope. There's no hope right now for any of the species. We're all being poisoned and they're trying to call it coronavirus. Coronavirus is the cover story for the illnesses and diseases and the autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses from the radioactive fallout and the poisoning of humanity by continuing to grow the food in a nuclear wasteland. This picture is actually from the major media in Japan trying to convince people that the food is not radioactive. So they show you a picture of farmers harvesting food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation and tell you it's not going to be contaminated. What would Freud say about that, I wonder? The evidence that I provide you is uncontestable. It's unassailable. Fukushima nuclear plume covered most of North America. Children were picking 2,700 becquerels a kilogram of radioactive cesium. Just again, you see them only acknowledging gamma, not alpha, beta, and neutron. Very rare for them to acknowledge the full spectrum of the radiation fallout. Japan's quake was so powerful it reached South Florida 30 minutes after. Government promos less than a stomach x-ray of radiation per day. Children can't even go outside. Well, that's only because they're heartless and soulless and refuse to evacuate the children. Which this kind of contempt, if you keep letting them get away with it, become more bolder and more genocidal. At what point should we put our foot down? At what point should we raise our voice in dissent? What is your point? What is your line in the sand? Because I can do 60 different shows on this one facet with the documentation we have accumulated. Physicians have deep concern about Canada being impacted by radioactive isotopes from Fukushima. More and more often, children complain of circulatory disturbances, tiredness, dizziness after Fukushima from the poisoning. And this is what we're seeing also with the coronavirus, and particularly in Canada, which has now been poisoned 10 years straight. Surface forecast showed radioactive Xenon-133 lingering over Florida. No, this is the Xenon-133 modeling. The model, right, didn't run its full course. If they let it run its full course, the entire planet is invisible from radioactive fallout. But to ship food from ground zero that done this and then claim that there's no adverse side effects, what's the point of having universities? What's the point of having academics? We might as well ban them. Obviously, they're pointless and they are very dangerous. High concentrations of radiation hit the United States and Canada. Plume is rich in, again, they want you to believe that only cesium is the only emitter that showed up. This is absurdness, but that's how brainwashing works. There's 1,000 different types of fission products you have to worry about. and you better worry about it. Canada suspends mobile radiation measurements around Vancouver as radiation cloud looms. And you can see the different dates when they switched off the radiation detectors in the different places. So they immediately done everything they could to trick and deceive everybody, particularly in Canada. Fukushima nuclear plume covers most of Northern America. And you see these pictures of endless bags, endless pictures, and endless bags of radiation. And these are where they're still growing the food. And they didn't pick up any of these bags till 2013. They would never stop growing food. I have been gutted all day trying to put this together. Literally heartbroken all day. Literally, I would get up and go and get a cup of tea and just sit there. No sound, no screens, no computers running. Just sat there in silence, trying to wrap my mind around this story, the actual implications. It's just so heartbreaking. Local officials advising residents not to drink rainwater under pressure from the government to stop testing. Not the government, the nuclear industry. The incredible betrayal. The incredible betrayal. Local officials in BC, Canada connects with pregnant mom and those newborns Dan and Asana was supposed to be a moderator on my site. I don't know why he wasn't. I'll click it again. Hopefully it works. Local officials in BC, Canada connects with pregnant moms and those with newborns after seeing radiation levels in rain rise steeply. At the end of the day, the community's health is at stake. So what they're acknowledging was that the radioactive fallout was killing neonates and infants, and we've seen that backed up by studies from the United States. 300 times more radiation released into the atmosphere from burning radiation than claimed by the government. Strontium found in 2,200 locations in Fukushima. Oh, and uranium and plutonium and americium and neptunium. Government session reveals 400,000 times normal radioactive Xenon-133 levels in Chiba, and that they're only acknowledging xenon. And these are absurd numbers, by the way, and that's 20 kilometers away from Tokyo. So there's zero possibility that food was safe. Tokyo at 18 million becquerels a square meter is proof that the food was not safe, yeah? So we got a poll tonight. Was Canada wrong in lifting the Fukushima radioactive food ban a incredible 90 days after the nuclear meltdown started? Somebody accidentally clicked no. 27 votes so far, and a resounding yes, it is wrong to be lifting the ban on a nuclear wasteland. It's not wrong, it's just horrifying. It's terrifying. It's just, like, if you were pre-Fukushima and you were writing a book about radioactive accidents, there's zero possibilities that you were able to dream up the stuff I showed you already. It's that surreal. But it's that important. Who should fight for everybody in Canada? Who should fight for all the children in Canada? Because the academics are not going to do it. The scientists are not going to do it. The regulatory agencies are not going to do it. The government is not going to do it. So who should do it when they're the ones that are supposed to do it? They're the ones we're supposed. So now we can no longer ever, for the rest of our history, trust any scientist of any discipline. How can we? How does that work? How can you ever trust an academic or a scientist again of any discipline once you know this story? I dare you. Canadian politician leaders shocked by the country's Fukushima response could not get answers and accused of fear-mongering. Canadian newspaper tries to get the soil tested for radiation. Private companies, government agencies, and universities all refuse to get involved. Really? So how can you ever trust a university again, or government agencies, or the private companies? How can you go to them to get anything tested? Because you can't. The industry created all the controlled opposition, and that's the only options you have is these controlled oppositions. And so they're completely out of control. And they're exterminating everything and everybody as we speak. Again, if it was just this much radiation that you're seeing there, and that was it, there was still no way you can justify eating the food from the entire prefecture because they picked up that much radiation. But see, that never stops. There's 150,000 pictures of different piles. BC Canada sees a spike in numbers of sudden infant deaths, and why so many of those have come up this year, we don't know. July the 6th, which is a month after they lift the food ban. It's a murder machine and a disease factory. Health Canada detected massive amounts of radiation and then stabbed everybody in the back. Like trying to wrap your mind around all of these pictures of 1-ton bags of radiation and somehow say that the food is okay when they didn't start picking these up till 2 years after. Members of Parliament, Health Canada negligence on Fukushima radiation threats. They kept their mouth shut so their family wouldn't understand they were monsters, so they wouldn't have to murder their own families when they found out the truth, right? Because they're serial killers. I mean, let's face it, that's what an academic and a scientist actually is now. The evidence is overwhelming. They hate us. I don't know why, but they hate us. They feel that we're inferior and that they're superior, and that it's somehow their duty to exterminate us and to cause us incredible agony and misery by watching our loved ones perish from this disease factories. Imagine Health Canada. You know who Health Canada is? My goodness. Calls 300 times background levels of iodine-131 irrelevant. This is absurdness. Whose responsibility is it to tell this story, see? Obviously it's mine because nobody else will tell the story. And so I've trained myself to become a forensic investigative journalist over the last decade in order to be able to tell the story and provide the documentations to back up any assertions, but to also educate the population so they can make up their own minds if they can ever find me, because I'm obviously hid away from the population. And that the lunatic crazies that censors me, imagine how crazy they are. To get their paycheck is to destroy everybody else on the planet. It just defies any rationale whatsoever. Marine biologists in Canada, salmon species need to be tested for radiation. The government doesn't want us to know. because the government is no government at all. The nuclear industry has captured the key positions. And 100% captured the universities and 100% captured the media and the regulatory agencies. Again, they're still growing food there and shipping it worldwide, particularly Canada. I'm so heartbroken that less than 90 days after multiple nuclear reactors are melting down, and that's going to rage for who knows how many hundreds of years, they started shipping food into my country, which is supposed to be the best country on the planet, but is now the most pathetic country in human history. New evidence emerged that the radiation in Canada was worse than the Canadian officials ever let on, and was a radioactive cover-up. And they never start picking these bags up till 2 years later, so they poisoned us mercilessly in Canada. It was 100% assault upon all Canadians. Scientific America, Fukushima radiation could very well lead to negative health effects in the United States and Canada. Because the radiation doesn't just cause cancer, it causes heart problems and liver problems and lung and respiratory, and pituitary, can't even pronounce my words tonight. I think it's the first time I ever screwed up that word. Heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. Up to 1,800 illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. How can any industry or anybody on the planet quantify and justify shipping food from this place? Why do they hate everybody so much? Why, how does that actually work? Apparently you can't get a job in the nuclear industry unless you hate everybody and everything. And apparently there's enough of those people on the planet to fill all those positions. Hot particles bombarded the West Coast of U.S. and Canada, which is an extinction event for all the species, not just humans. These are absurd pictures. These are incredible pictures. These are devastating pictures. Iodine in Canada is rainwater above the recommended levels for drinking water. It was actually 20 million particles per liter of rainfall, which destroyed all the species quite quickly. It should not exceed the guidelines, and the government failed to disclose it. No, the nuclear industry went genocide on everybody. They're completely out of control. And they're now a threat to our planet, an imminent threat. They're much more dangerous than an asteroid. It's a slow kill in increments over a decade or two, and then it snowballs. And so the coronavirus is there to pick up the death tally and whisk away the blame somewhere else instead of the nuclear industry. Serious questions arise about why Canadian government failed to alert the public. Lawmakers, serious questions are rising. Why the Canadian government failed to alert the public about the radioactive fallout from Fukushima. So it was so bad, the radioactive fallout was so bad, as I covered at the beginning of the show. Imagine how bad Ground Zero is, where they're actually growing food all around this spot here. This is absurd pictures of the this is documentation. This is unassailable documentation. It's unequivocal that they are committing a genocide and an omnicide against everybody on the planet. Tonight's show is about Canada, and the betrayal against Canada started within 90 days. They didn't even pick up another bag for 2 years, and they were already all out on poisoning as many Canadians as humanly possible. Calgary Sun. No need to panic, probably, about Fukushima fallout that rained on Canada. The government hasn't even released the data. Well, the government, being the nuclear industry, has got key positions in the government. It's so heartbreaking, every facet of this story. It's so heartbreaking because, for me in particular, it's because I wallow in this excrement all day, every day. And I'm censored, and I work like a dog to tell the story, and I'm censored as if all they do is flick a switch and censor me like I don't even exist. 30 people on my show that I've been doing for a decade. The most important topic in human history. Was Canada wrong in lifting the Fukushima radioactive food ban a lousy 90 days after nuclear meltdown started from multiple nuclear reactors? If you go back and look at my very, very first video, if you're not familiar with Fukushima very much, go back and look at my very first video. I think it's around 17 minutes long. And tells the story of Fukushima. And shows you the pictures of the reactors, etc., etc. It'll get you up to speed right away. And because I've been doing this for so long, that's a priority, is you need to understand the rest of the facets, right? So radiation poisoning people, that's a crime. If I take radiation and poison you, that's murder. International scientists, Japan experts must be allowed to report health consequences of Fukushima. The official data is all denial and pressure to downplay the true impact of the disasters. I mean, my goodness, when you see endless pictures of 1-ton bags, that's runaway mode. If you're there, you see that, you're supposed to run away, back the way you just came. You're not supposed to go another few feet closer. You're supposed to run away. To grow food there and to ship it 90 days later to any country is unconscionable. It's not acceptable. It's never going to be acceptable. It's an emergency. What I'm showing you is unequivocally 100% an emergency. I'm begging you on this planet to stand tall. Like, I'll keep going, but it's not fear. And I'm doing this with very little support. Just a tiny, tiny, tiny handful of people are supporting me. And so we are barely keeping this operation afloat. Just barely keeping it afloat. I should have 10 people working for me so we can come out and wake the planet up instantly. And I've been denied the opportunity, despite the fact that I have proven beyond any shadow of a doubt, unfortunately, that I am the person for the job. I don't want the job, but I'm the right person for the job, and everybody knows that. Right? I'm honest, and I'm articulate, and I have the documentation to back up my assertions, and I've done the research expeditions to prove that there was adverse effects from this that are the equivalent of an extinction level event. And it didn't need to be this way. It absolutely unequivocally never meant, it was never needed to go this way. We could have come up with solutions. We could have went to war against Fukushima and it never would have been as bad as it is. The nuclear industry was happy to let it play out the way it did. They reveled in the genocide and the ecocide and the omnicide. I don't understand. Like, tell me what it is you need to make up your mind. If you're still on a fence, you come this far through the video and you're still on a fence about this subject, you're actually stupid. You're literally the stupidest person I've ever heard tell of. If you made it this far in the video and you're still on the fence, you need to wake up. You need to grow up. You need a backbone. You need to stop being a worm, and you need to get busy like me. It's outrageous that all this falls on my shoulders. It's unconscionable that it falls on my shoulders only. What the hell is wrong with people? And what does it take for you to fight back, I wonder? Canada TV, new concerns about radiation levels in fish. It's a major event worldwide. Here's France's model of the radioactive fallout. This is based upon 16 days. This is the Pacific Ocean covered. This is North America continent covered. This is the Atlantic Ocean covered. This is Europe covered. Do you really think you can escape that radiation? Do you really think that there's no adverse side effects because you're smart and it can't hurt you? You really think you're invisible on this planet? You are delusional if you do. You're incredibly delusional. If you think you're going to get away from that and escape that, you are incredibly stupid if you believe there will be no adverse effects for that. For 40 years, from the age of 20, and for the next 40 years, I never gained any weight whatsoever. I was 165 pounds max. Typically, I was 155. If I was lazy, I might get to 165. In the last year, my weight has went completely, not my weight, like not because of diet or something. It's because my thyroid has been poisoned. And the evidence that is my Geiger counter up there in my studio. These are absurd numbers on my Geiger counter, by the way. I've been poisoned by this. Fukushima top scientist, which is David Suzuki, says Fukushima is the most terrifying situation I can imagine. And I've seen a paper which says it's bye-bye Japan and evacuate North America's west coast if reactor 4 goes. Evacuate the north coast of a continent if a power plant breaks down. And of course the power plant broke down. I have never lost hope in humanity. Maybe that's the flaw, but I've never lost hope in humanity. Here's reactor 4 to your right. And this is what they want you to think it looks like. And all the media on the planet has came out with that picture over there and told you that was Unit 4, not this. So you tell me what's going on. How can you trust your media? You have to be literally incredibly, unbelievably gullible to trust your media when they're willing to do that, when it actually looks like this. It's just, how can that seem capable? How can that even possibly happen? Well, I don't know, but it did. Radiation Fukushima in Alaska, university scientists concerned, is the food supply safe? I don't think anyone can really answer that. No, it's not safe. How can it be safe when you covered the whole planet in radioactive fallout and Japan is shipping food from a nuclear wasteland into a country 90 days after a nuclear meltdown? So everything from Japan should be banned here in Canada immediately from what they've done to us. That's just common sense, isn't it? Die off of mammals, birds, reptiles. So many diseases. Names out of a science fiction thriller: hemorrhagic diseases, plagues. Studies are underway to find out. Which is not true. They didn't do that, right? I done the studies though, and I'll show you quickly. Maybe. trying to find it. Oh, okay, here we go. I'm hoping the system will catch up, but spare me one moment.
We're leaving Port Hart.
Okay, here we go. Just let me give you a quick example of some of my research expeditions and why, and this was in British Columbia to Alaska. It's quite shocking. This is so the arrows you're looking at, I went to these places over and over and over and spent 4 or 5 days at each of these places doing random samples. But what I've done was I sailed up to Alaska 4 to 5 months a year for 6 years doing species counts. It's a very humble operation. We've been at it now for a very long time, and I have an incredible amount of documentation. In desperation, I figured if we'd done the research expeditions, and you could fill the beach up with people, but you're not going to find the species to the left. They're actually exterminated. And nobody on the planet is willing to acknowledge it. Despite the fact that I've done the expeditions over and over, year after year, the species never came back. These are authentic before and after pictures. And this is what it should like, and this is now what it does look like. I'll get out of the picture here. This is just a couple miles from Alaska. There's a 19-foot tide exchange. I'm going in to take my doggy to let her have a pee on the beach before we move down the coastline. I was doing the open coastlines.
Take a pee before it takes off?
And the rocks and the beaches should be covered with life, but you can see there's no color whatsoever. So the pictures coming up is what it should look like. So to your left is what it should look like. Incredible, beautiful, vibrant diversity, permanently gone. These pictures to your left will never be taken again. That's because of Fukushima. That's omnicide, where it destroys all species. We repeated these expeditions year after year, and I wasn't healthy when I started, and I'm not healthy today. And I've been ran into the ground non-stop for over a decade, and it's not fear. I'm not a bad person for doing these research expeditions. Was Canada wrong in lifting the Fukushima radioactive ban 90 days after the nuclear meltdown started? That's the poll tonight. Report reveals highest levels of radioactive xenon to hit Canada. Highest levels. So why would you eat food from ground zero? Canada government withhold testing data, less confident about eating not just Pacific seafood, but Atlantic seafood, and sense of potential widespread disaster. I mean, every one of these pictures is just absurd. And this is where they're still growing food today and shipping it into Canada and other countries that are not paying attention. This is a study from California of the radioactive fallout bioaccumulating each day in humans, animals, mammals, birds, insects. Again, why would you grow food here? What kind of sadistic person thought that was a good idea? Canadian governments withhold testing. I mean, those green tarps are covering 1-ton bags. It's truly unimaginable. The whole story is, I understand it's hard, it's a bit of a shock to people, but you're negligent you're irresponsible if you don't learn this documentation. How can you protect yourself if you don't learn the truth, the facts? Award-winning project finds seafood sold in Canada with high radiation levels, which is a death sentence. These are disease factors, not just cancer, but 1,800 illnesses. Many samples well above contamination limits. Incredible discoveries. I hope people will open their eyes. That was 2014. So growing food in this nuclear wasteland and shipping it to unsuspecting countries where every academic and every scientist turned their back and said, I see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. But I'm still a person. Well, you're not a person when you turn your back on this. You stop being a human the minute you turn your back on that. You no longer have the moral high ground. The reality is no technology exists anywhere to solve the problem. Therefore, the more people know about it, the more likely we are to come up with a solution. The nuclear industry decided to go the complete opposite way. And in the geysers, the steam shooting up for miles around, that's exactly what happened at the Fukushima plant. It went China syndrome. It cracked the earth in multiple places, and the steam coming out of the ground was lethal doses over 10 sieverts per hour. By the way, that was the max the Geiger counters, stationary Geiger counters, were able to measure. All of the western United States and East Coast and Midwest Canada covered with airborne particles at various altitudes based solely on reactor number 1 explosion. And that was a Canadian study. They hid that away. That was leaked online after a few years. Paper suits can't protect you from radioactive fallout, by the way. New type of radiation forecast shows radioactive cesium iodines over a large section of U.S. and Canada. And those models will look something like this one is the Neptunium-239, which decays to plutonium-239, by the way. And this model was based on TEPCO's numbers covering the entire planet with neptunium. These are hot particles. Disinformation by nuclear proponents try to confuse the public, external, internal effects. And there was a legion, an incredible army of propaganda. There was 2,000 nuclear students in Taiwan, spent the first several years at a university spamming comment sections across the entire breadth of the internet to misinform people, downplay what happened. Nuclear students. This is the most dangerous animal in the world. It's responsible for millions of deaths every year, and by its side, a great white shark swims peacefully. The nuclear industry is exactly that. Canada, these are the dates where Canada shut down the Geiger counters across Canada as the radioactive plume was hammering the coastline. April 16 forecast shows the radioactive cloud stretching from Texas to Canada. Texas to Canada. Of course, you have to be insane to grow food in a nuclear wasteland. You literally have to be insane to do it. Or incredibly gullible, and that's all they needed was a few gullible people. And then they found ways to ship the food into Canada by just lifting the ban. The nuclear industry is a very powerful industry in Canada, and they have murdered Canadians and the ecosystem so they can have a paycheck every Friday. It's unconscionable. Uninterrupted line, a continuous plume stretching across the Pacific. It's shocking. These are shocking pictures. because they never stopped growing food there. They didn't pick up the bags start picking up bags till 2 years later. They're still picking them up today, over 60 million of these 1-ton bags. We're in real trouble. We're in dire trouble. 10 years have gone by. We don't have the option of waiting. We need to stand tall. We need to have a debate. There needs to be dissent. Somebody has to be honest. Members of Canadian Legislative Assembly says, I'd be very hesitant in saying everything is safe. They were supposed to stand up for us. Should Canada be concerned about radiation from Fukushima? Doctors and local officials say yes. They were started shipping food in on June the 14th. No restrictions, no testing. It just doesn't even seem possible, see? Nobody could be that cruel, can they? Well, they are. It's called the nuclear industry. Canadian nuclear plant shuts down after 2 malfunctions, leaking for months, and the nuclear industry hid it away again. These pictures are incredible pictures. This is absurd. Just one of these pictures is absurd, by the way. But if you had seen the entire collection that I got, it's mind-boggling. Because when you start clicking through each of these pictures, it's just, there's no end to it. There's so much radiation, you just can't wrap my mind around it. I was at this long before Fukushima happened, by the way. New evidence has emerged that radiation in Canada was the worst. Yeah, it was a cover-up. But it's not a cover-up, it's a genocide. Significant rises in cancer within 5 years. No, significant rises in Alzheimer's and dementia and autism and heart problems and liver problems and lung and respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline. Your body's immune system is completely compromised. And so you're incredibly susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally benign and innocuous and harmless. Now they're lethal. We call it coronavirus, but it's actually radiation. Radioactivity, 300% of normal background in Los Angeles. There's so much radiation, it's just, whoa, my goodness. Fukushima radiation could very well lead to negative health effects in the U.S. and Canada. Could very well lead to negative effects. How can it not? It's bad enough, see? The radioactive fallout is bad enough. But to actually ship food in from a nuclear wasteland just doesn't seem real. But how can you deny the facts? You're incredibly complacent if you ignore what I'm showing you. I know it's a tough and it's a very tough subject for everybody. Well, I bring you so much information that you can't deny the documentation. Like, you can if you want to, but you're not being honest. You're being stupid to deny the documentation I bring to you. There's no fun in what I'm doing. There's no glory in what I'm doing. There's no bands playing at the end of the day for Dana, okay? I get more hate mail than you could ever wrap your mind around. I get more attacks. I get more gags pulled on me. I don't know how many times people call me up and say, oh, we're going to support you, Dana. This is great what you're doing. And then they laugh at me and call me an idiot because they're from the nuclear industry. They just trying to defeat me, see? Trying to beat me down, browbeat me, trying to ridicule me and humiliate me. I'm already humiliated. They're shipping food in from a nuclear wasteland. I'm gone to war, literally gone to war every day for you. I think of you. I worry sick about you. I worry sick about your loved ones. I worry sick about your friends. I worry sick about your pets. I'm worried sick about your future. I'm terrified about you, about your future, because you're being murdered by an industry that you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, or hear it, or feel it, or touch it, or pick it up, or even throw rocks at it. But you better believe what I'm showing you is true. You need to appreciate this, that if I don't show it to you, you will never see this documentation. You will never know this exists. And what? I'm abandoned? I have sacrificed everything, non-stop, all day, every day, relentlessly doing research expeditions that are never fully funded and that I'm always have to do without endless amounts of equipment. I never can afford to hire people to help me. It's unbelievably heartbreaking. And I can bring it to this industry. I can pound this industry. Physicians suspect Canada will see more cancer, decreased fetal viabilities, decreased fertilities. Well, you can expect that in all the species, all the mammals and animals and birds and insects too, and generational. Canadian official, iodine-131 in the rainwater was above recommended levels. It was 220 million atoms. 55 is an evacuation zone. 220 million per liter in radioactive fallout of just the 129. That ends up in the thyroid and turns into mutated hormones, for goodness sakes. Imagine the children and the insects and the animals and the birds, what happens to them. They're exterminated. They're exterminated. And we went out and done the research expeditions, and we'll continue to do it. And I think far ahead, because I know that the industry is going to isolate me. And so we accumulated the research equipment necessary to keep this operation running on minimal help. But that's not acceptable. How is that acceptable? How, humanity is going to look back on this moment and hang everything on this planet at some point will hang their head in shame. That universities and institutions didn't do this. That an old crippled man who wasn't even barely healthy was forced to go out and rip his body apart in order to get the documentation. The entire planet should hang their head in shame that they done that to me. All of the western U.S. and most of East Coast, Midwest, Canada covered with airborne particles based solely on a single reactor. All reactors are hemorrhaging radiation. You can't check food for radiation with a Geiger counter. You're only going to find gamma. What about the alpha? What about the beta? What about the neutrons? It's like going to a mechanic and saying, fix my engine, and he goes around, put air pressure, checks the air pressure in your tire and say, okay, $10,000, have a nice day. That's the nuclear industry for you. Fukushima radioactive plume contaminated the entire Northern Hemisphere. The entire Northern Hemisphere. And then they ship food into Canada a lousy 90 days after the nuclear meltdown started, for God's sakes. Literally the cruelest thing history will remember is that moment there when they shipped food from a nuclear waste down 90 days later. The cruelest thing imaginable. The most insidious, gutless, spineless, soulless thing you could do was that. Guaranteed to make everybody sick. Conservative radio host, I was all about nuclear power, but now I believe this is one of the greatest threats facing humanity. U.S. government concluded Fukushima disaster could spread to a global scale. And it did. We have endless models of the radioactive fallout, by the way, based upon accurate modeling. But they didn't include the entire inventories. I mean, my goodness. Each of these are 1-ton bags of radiation. They grew food right there. And then they covered it with bags 2 years later when they started picking it up. Pacific herring in Canada bleeding from eyeballs, faces, fins and tails. All 100 that were examined. The evidence is so overwhelming, I'm confused why we're still having a conversation. We're going to be hearing about Fukushima contamination for decades in Canada and the U.S. as a physician. Well, what's left of us will. In the history of science, we've never seen anything like the Fukushima plume. Why is Japan allowed to get away with contaminating the Pacific Ocean? This model was based from Germany, was based on the inputs into the ocean, the official numbers, and it would contaminate the entire ocean by 2017. But the problem was that the radioactive fallout covered the ocean in just a few days. If they let the model run for another 10 days, that model ran for 20 days, it covers the entire planet, see? So they stopped the model at 20 days because otherwise you can't see the rest of the planet. I'm begging this planet to wake up and make a stand and have a conversation. At least do that much. At least do that much. And when they say that it's double Chernobyl, Chernobyl was a 200-ton reactor. 4 reactors in Japan were 800 tons each, but they had decades of 800-ton reactor cores stored at the top of the building. In fact, they don't have a repository in Japan. The pools typically had 6 million pounds and 12 million pounds altogether at the top of each building of used reactor cores. This dwarfs Chernobyl. Chernobyl was graphite. These reactors are pure uranium, pure plutonium, and reactor number 3 in Japan was a mixed oxide fuel facility that is already gone through a chain reaction. In other words, it's unbelievably dangerous, hideously more dangerous than all reactors. It's absurd. Concerned officials now considering ban on Japanese food. Not Canada. Canada says, yeah, no, we'll take the food. We don't care about Canada. We care about nuclear. That's what Canada done. Well, Korea closed 130 schools. Canada's like, let's poison everybody in Canada with radioactive food from Japan. So that's a great idea. That way nobody can complain down the road. They'll be dead and sick. If we do nothing, even Tokyo could be coming off limit. And if we do nothing, Canada and every other country will be off limits. At what point should we make a stand as a collective, as a species? How do we ever get to this point? It's just mind-boggling complacency to let the nuclear industry get to this point. Think about that statement. We may not be able to live in Japan someday. That's not an opinion or a conjecture. That's a fact. You will not be able to live in Japan. You shouldn't even be there now. The evidence is unbelievable. It's unbelievably overwhelming amount of evidence, is it not? Like, my goodness, there is no such thing as a safe level of man-made anthropogenic radiation. And the most incredible betrayal imaginable is the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is United Nations, a corporation, by the way, says that the allowable radiation standards are based on benefits, not safety. What that means is it's not based on man-made, it's based on harmless and innocuous and benign solar system emitters. It's not based on uranium, plutonium, and everything else. So the International Atomic Energy Agency standards are based on a 25-year-old healthy male consuming natural stuff, not man-made stuff. So the International Atomic Energy Agency doesn't have a right to exist and should be prosecuted for this incredible betrayal. That's the moral and ethical thing to do. By the way, nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists on the entire planet. Eating it is not an option. There is no safe level. Despite the industry constantly increasing their version of safe level, because they can't get rid of it, so they just increase the level and say, no, that's okay. Oh, there's another accident. Well, here's a new level. That's going to be okay. And then nobody understands the significance. Or they have the control opposition, have a debate, and the debate is meant to lead you away from the facts. This is where I pick up the pieces. This is absurdness. Government tells company to conceal information on radioactive tea leaves because of public anxiety. You know why you have 100 sirens around a nuclear power plant? Because you're supposed to run away and never come back. That's the activists had them put there. Isotopes transfer to land via sea sprays, aerosol, flooding, human exposure by inhalation, food, contact. So the stuff comes out of the ocean, ends up 200 miles inland, because they've done studies of how insects 200 miles inland are acclimated to more salt in their diet from the sea spray, finds its way up to 200 miles inland. So that the higher pH in the soil, right? And radiation is liberated from the ocean through the same venue, same vector. Fukushima is unprecedented in scope. Appears utterly beyond human control. Raging fire and spent fuel pool, yet claims only partial meltdowns. So the industry has went through an incredible amount of effort to disarm the population, at the same time to poison the population so we couldn't fight back, and then cooked up the coronavirus to cover up the omnicide from the radiation itself. Right, that's what's going on. And the vaccines, there's $500 billion for each booster shot around the planet. The whole story is absurd, but we got no options. We have to have a debate. We have to have a conversation. We have to stop being complacent. We have to stop importing deadly food from a country that only intends to harm us. Top government nuke official warned Tokyo may have to be evacuated. May? Tokyo, as I showed you earlier, is absurd. 50,000 becquerels a kilogram in the soil where children walk by. Canada was actually even higher than that. And curium, which is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker for curium isotopes than you do for the plutonium isotopes. And plutonium was named after the devil because it's so deadly. And curium is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. These bags are full of curium. This is absurd pictures. Terrifying pictures is the better word for it. Japanese media blackout of words mocks plutonium meltdowns. High concentrations of hot particles. The whole story is absurd, isn't it? You abandon your communities. You pick up 60 million one-ton bags. You ship radioactive food to... Who's going to eat Kellogg's cereal? The children. 11 becquerels a kilogram. Children will see holes in their hearts. I'm confused how we ever got to this stage. Before Fukushima, the limit, because there was other accidents, weapons followed, was 0.1 1 becquerel per kilogram. Before Fukushima, 100 becquerels a kilogram is nuclear waste, by the way. After, and these bags are 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. After, because they can't get the numbers to come down, they call it safe to eat. But it's not safe to eat. And it's not safe to ship in 2 countries. It's certainly not safe to ship it from a nuclear wasteland. I don't understand why Japan hates everybody so much. All we wanted to do was help Japan. Japan refused everybody's help and decided to poison everybody worldwide. The whole story, 29 million becquerels a square meter after a rainfall in Tokyo. These are forever numbers. These are you running. If you see 29 million becquerels, 29 million counts, like 211 becquerels is what my Geiger counter is showing you right now per minute. If I seen 29 million becquerels on my Geiger counter, I'm going to run. Just going to run. I don't know where, but I'm going to run. Now I'm going to stay here. And in a major city with 36 million people at 29 million becquerels, my goodness. Hateful. $4,000 becquerels a kilogram in the fog, my goodness. And they're only talking about gamma cesium. You can't possibly keep up with it, can you? You can't actually keep up with it. I'll never get through the rest of it. I got too much piled up for everybody. So let's just run through the last 30 real quick. Radioactive and deadly for thousands of years. In Fukushima, it used to be 1 per million children to 2 per million children with thyroid tumors. 13,646 out of 40,000. Scaled up is 358,000 out of 1 million children. And it's not just going to be thyroid tumors. What you end up with is mutating. The thyroid is creating radioactive hormones in order for those tumors to show up. We may not be able to live in Japan someday. In fact, the first year, Japan had 212, in 2012, excess 865,000 cancers. And cancer is usually the last thing to show up. There's usually 1,800 illnesses. Inhaling the particles increases exposure by a factor of 1 trillion. Drinking it, consuming it, breathing it is the same thing. 100,000 Fukushima killed kids with thyroid tumors. Nuclear report warns of apocalyptic scenario at Fukushima could be one day considered the start of the ultimate catastrophe of the world and the planet. We don't have a right to sit silent. You don't have a right to sit silent. You have a right to speak up. You are in the know, have an obligation to speak up. I agree, Fukushima can be an extinction event. It's a myth that the disaster is contained. Nuclear engineer, I agree Fukushima can be an extinction event. I've showed you evidence from every spectrum. So at least you got educated on this program. Experts agree species of wildlife and fishes are endangered globally due to Fukushima. Yes, of course it is. 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129, that goes into the thyroid glands of animals and insects and birds and mammals and humans at an absurd amount of it per liter. That's an absurd amount. Imagine getting a hot tub like that or a bathtub like that, because that's what happened. So your thyroid now mutates that into radioactive hormones because it doesn't know what else to do with it. Human civilization may destroy itself. I mean, look at Fukushima. Let's do the poll, check the poll. Was Canada wrong in lifting the Fukushima radioactive food ban 90 days after the nuclear meltdown started? We have, thankfully, a resounding yes. We got 8 more to go. Nobel Prize winner, the only way to preserve human life is to completely turn away from nuclear power. Now, a lot of these that I'm showing you here tonight is up at my website. There's a link below to the article that I published last week. And so you can download these pictures, print them out, and make a book of them and share them with your local doctors, your local hospitals, your local engineers, your local politicians, your local radio stations. Right? Go to my website. The link is below to the actual article. And you can download all of these headlines that I showed you and print them out and make a book out of them. And so people can just flick through it and you'll wake them up right on the spot with that. They'll wake up right away. They read through 25 or 30 of these on their own in paper form, and they'll blow them away. They'll be like, oh my God. You'll see their face drop right away. I do it all the time. The only way to preserve human life is to completely turn away from nuclear power. Nobel Prize winner. We got 7 more to go. Time to quit nuclear power altogether threatens the very existence of human civilization as we know it. Once a nuclear accident occurs, everything is over. Nuclear power generation is the only invention that may destroy the futures of humans. Remember, a study in 2019, this is an absurd study by the way, 14.2% increase of operations per 100,000 live births for congenital heart diseases, neonates and infants across Japan was 14,200 children need open heart surgery in Japan. You're eating the food here in Canada and other countries, you're going to see the same thing. As the public, possibly worldwide, sickens, over time the truth will come out about what I'm showing you tonight. Because the entire population will get sick. And that's why they're feeding it to you, because they want you too weak to protest. That's their fantasy. But we're not at that point yet. So now's the time to make a stand. Now's the time to gut up. Now's the time to do the moral and ethical thing. And that's the last one. Okay, so let me say goodnight to everybody, I guess. And I haven't stopped. And so I'm going to take tomorrow and Saturday. Tomorrow we're going to have major snowfall. And I'll be heading in the woods looking for tracks. I was in the woods this morning. Not a long trip this morning. But 2.5 hours because I had to do running around. I'm trying to get the engineer to make up pieces for some of the equipment that I got. And I ultimately got to bring everything there, and that way they can do it. So maybe, well, tomorrow we're supposed to have a snowstorm. I'm not sure if I'll get it tomorrow. So it'll probably be Monday. As the public possibly worldwide sickens. I mean, what an statement. That's Japan Times column. And then you've seen all the headlines I showed you, all the bags from Japan. How can you deny it? Let me say goodnight to everybody. We're going to end the poll. Let's look at the poll one more time. So was Canada wrong in lifting the Fukushima radioactive food ban 90 days after the nuclear meltdown started? We have 98% says yes, unequivocally yes. And we're going to end that. We got 45 votes now. Where's that? My eyeballs is, yeah, 45 votes. Wow. Awesome, folks. Thank you. We're going to end that poll right there. I'll come and say goodnight to everybody. that I can find. And I'll get a couple of days of rest. And I'll remind everybody also a couple of things here. Underneath my video, now after the video, you're going to see a little dialogue box to open all of those out. But that link there, Horror Canada, the day Canada committed genocide against Canadians, was June the 14th. You can go and download all those pictures at that article. At the bottom of all of those is 2 links. Both of them are directly to how you can donate to me. That's my PayPal. Just click that and it'll take you to Dana, so you can't possibly make a mistake. And at the Nuclear Proctologist, if you let the page load up, you'll see that donate button is right underneath the picture there. You can just click the donate button and you can donate with credit cards and donate. I'm just showing you so you can actually donate with confidence to me, because I'm not going away. I'm not going to be laying down, and I'm not going to be giving up. And I'm not going to be silent either, because somebody has to speak out. Somebody has to educate the population. And until somebody can show up and do the job better than I can, well, I'm going to keep going hard. So, SCH, good night. Jeff, Ease, Albert, Tree Fruit, Star Dance, Colette, Ease, James Appleton. Good night, everybody. Christian, Patrick, Dana Nasana, Michael. Good night, everybody. Everybody's watching this later and right now in the background. Hi to everybody. Albert. I'm just scrolling up through the names. I'll come back to the most recent comments in a moment. And just a shout out, because my eyes are definitely getting bad as I get older. James Mangan. I'm not even sure which one is which. Is it the first one or the second one? Mangan or Megan? I don't know anymore. I say both of them, that way I know I got it right. James Lucid. Hi, James. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great weekend. I'll be in the woods because we're getting snow tomorrow and snow Saturday and snow Sunday. So if the snow's not too deep, I'll take the quad in there and we'll look for tracks. I was in this morning seeing one set of tracks of rabbits, but it was warming up, so a lot of that snow melted, and I gave it up after about 2.5 hours. AA. Sorry. AA. Good night, everybody. Peaceware. I'm almost through the names here. We're almost finished. Let me finish it out. Ah, yes. Who else we got here? Chet Austin. I'm almost to the top of the comments. We'll come back down to the recent comments in a minute. Lots of comments tonight. Wow. Mr. Finnegan. Hillary. Well, we had lots of people tonight, didn't we? And I'm probably going to miss it. Jeff, I'm probably going to miss a few people because I'm scrolling pretty quick here. We're almost through it. I find it's a good way for me to switch off at the end of these presentations because I work all day. Then I got to do the presentation, takes a couple of hours. And it's hard for me to switch off because it's almost 12 o'clock midnight here. Robert. And here we go. We're at the very top almost. I don't like missing people's names. But it always happens, I notice. Okay, Tim Norris. Thank you, Tim. Colette again. Hugs for Colette. Timeless Truth. Looks like we got everybody. Yeah, we got everybody. We'll see everybody Sunday. Sunday's going to be a long show because we're going to do a recap to finish up February of 2021. So that's around 1,600 clicks. So it'll move pretty fast because we're only going to cream of the stories we cover. We usually cover about 220,000 clicks each year. That's not counting pictures. That's not counting headlines like this. That's just news stories and academic studies. So we cover an absurd, unbelievable. Katja, hi Katja. Terry, good night everybody. God bless everybody. Port Angeles, lots of people sneaking in on the end of the show with their say good night. I'm going to have to call it good night. Have to call it quit at some point, right? It's late at night. I'm really happy though we made it through the show tonight. And remember, there's a link below my video to the nuclear proctologist, so you can download a lot of these pictures and print them out or email them or whatever. Take the best ones you want and just email them out to random people you think should consider this documentation. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, and if you can afford to, please consider donating. The 2 links are at the bottom of the description. They're directly to me. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody Sunday. Have a great night and a great weekend, folks.